Um, I want to talk a little in this conference this morning about cultivating a culture of ministry and the challenges that each generation of Christians have faced. Sometimes it may sound like I'm just anybody talking about the problems in the church. You can have this sense that, oh gosh, for the good old days, like last year when we had no problems. But now we have all these terrible problems. Well, the church has always had problems because God sends us tests. So never complain that God has tested you. That's the way it's been from the beginning. So anyway, what I'd like to talk about then, it's just a brief summary. I want to talk about where I come from when I look at my participation in the life of the church. And you can fill in the blanks for your own life because you are participants in the church. You are not bystanders. As members of the Serra Club, you have stepped forward to be participants in the life of the church, not spectators. And so that's very important. And some of you have perhaps even taken that further step of not just being participants in the life of the church, but finding your vocation in the church. Your legacy is being created in the church rather than your resume is being created in the church. There's a big difference between the two, and I will talk about that later. So I want to talk about where I came from, what makes Christian life countercultural, and if you think it's only been our own time, then why are we celebrating 1900 years of feasts of martyrs? Everybody has faced challenges because that's what life is about. In particular, we all participate in the incarnation, the mystery of the incarnation. By the mystery of the incarnation, you and I live in the 21st century. We do not live in the 12th. And as much as I would like to live in the 12th for a lot of cultural and artistic and musical reasons, they also did not have indoor plumbing or medicine that I would want to participate in. So it's nice to wish we were in the good old days, but by and large, if you went there, you wouldn't be happy. So we live in the 21st century, but the tradition of the church shapes us and prepares us to participate in life today. And I'd like to close with a few comments about the challenges of promoting vocations within the church, and I'm not excluding that to bishops. We don't need to promote bishops or vocations to the episcopacy. We never seem to run out of bishops, but we do run out of priests. But I want to say we also promote the vocation of the lay person and the lay minister and your vocation as well. I want to start just with a comment on our own Benedictine tradition. Benedictine abbeys, while they are all independent, they do have relationships with other monasteries around the world. And at St. John's, currently we have several close relationships with a few European abbeys, one in Mexico City, a couple in Vietnam, and one in India. So it enriches us to stay in touch with them. But we also learn a lot about their traditions and they learn from us. And one of the oldest relationships we've had has been with an abbey in Vienna called the Schottenstift. If you've been to Austria, you've been to Melk, or you've seen it. You can't miss it, unless you deliberately try to. But the Schottenstift was founded in the 15th century. It's in the center of Vienna, inside the ring, about 3 blocks from the Hofburg. And our monks have been staying there off and on for over 100 years. So in the old days, when you went to school in Rome, you didn't fly back for vacations or summers because it was just too expensive and too long. So the abbot would always insist that monks go visit other monasteries in Europe. And the Schotten was a favorite. And the monks there were very welcoming and happy to welcome monks from all sorts of monasteries. But they were keenly aware that customs in Austria were different from customs elsewhere. And in particular, many visiting monks would want to go to the opera because Vienna is such a musical capital. but the abbot was always cautious to remind visiting monks. And one of the stories that we've passed down at St. John's over the years was when one of our first monks to go there was greeted by the abbot, and the abbot said, now I have to tell you, you probably want to go to the opera this evening, but it's important to remember that going to the opera is forbidden for religious. The reason being it's lewd, and you've got love songs and enjoyment and all. So anyway, he said, so it's important that you remember that canon law forbids religious from going to the opera. So when you go to the opera this evening, please do not wear your habit. And it shows how we adapt our tradition. And I say that too, just so you don't come away with the impression that monks live these totally boring lives of isolation. We participate in life like you do too, and we face the same challenges. But in any case, when I visited the Schotten for the first time, there was a young German university student at the University of Vienna who was staying with the monks, and it was his break time, and he had time he volunteered to tour me around Vienna. So I was there for about 8 days, and he toured me every day, and we had some wonderful experiences as he introduced me to Vienna. And then finally, on about the 6th day, I brought up a subject that surprised him. And it was that I had noticed that the monks there really enjoyed his presence, and he seemed to enjoy their presence. And so something naturally occurred to me. So I said, Gerhard, I hope you've noticed that the monks really like you and enjoy your presence, and you seem to be enjoying your time here as well. And he was staying like 3 months. Have you ever thought about joining the monastery? Has any monk here ever brought that up to you? And he said, well, actually, no one's brought it up. And I had thought about it a little bit. And I said, well, before you leave here at the end of the summer, talk to somebody, talk to the abbot or whoever, just to explore this, just to deal with it. And if nothing comes of it, fine. But if something comes from it, great. So anyway, I heard later on, after I had left, that he did talk to the abbot, and he subsequently became a monk there. And I was invited to his ordination, and that was so. And I felt pleased that I had brought up the subject when everybody else there was just too timid or thought, oh, who would want to join? But anyway, he's still there. He's had a good life, and things have gone well for him. I'm going to come back to the Schotten at the end. But in any case, the point being, you don't have to be the Lord God Almighty coming down from Mount Sinai to invite people to do interesting things in their lives. You can do it too. And you may not get anybody to go to seminary, for example, or join a monastery or a convent, but you may change their life in other ways. So never underestimate your possibility to change the course of a life by simply saying something decent. Conversely, never underestimate the possibility of trashing another person's life by saying something horrible to them. So St. Benedict says in his rule that the tongue holds the key to life and death. Make sure your tongue brings life rather than destruction or disappointment. I mean, Catholics have been very good about driving people out of the church. We've driven as many people out of the church as we brought into the church. So be aware of your power, the power of speech to change a life. Anyway, so in that respect, I saw my time with Gerhard at the Schottenstift to be part and parcel of what any of you can do as well. What do I bring to the table as a monk and as a person in the Catholic Church? Well, first of all, I'm a historian. But I would remind you that all of you are historians. You all have memories, and those memories impact the way you live your life today. you still remember those key moments that kind of charted the course of your life, and that accumulated wisdom that you have in your memory shapes who you are today. So I'm a historian by training and by nature. I'm a monk in the Order of St. Benedict. I'm someone who has found my vocation in life. There's a wonderful book by David Brooks, if some of you have read it, called The Second Mountain. And he talks about the two steps in life that the one step that most everybody goes through, and the second step that some people go through. First of all, the first mountain is what it takes to build a resume. You know, the stuff you do in the course of a life, and the stuff they put into your obituary. You know, how many kids you had, how many grandchildren you have, what company you worked for, and so on down the line. These kinds of things that show up in any kind of obituary. But a very lucky bunch of people go on to the second mountain, and that's when they discover what their vocation in life is, what animates them, what causes them to realize that this is my legacy. And I hope you've thought about the legacy that you are going to leave. And I hope you want to leave some sort of legacy where you made a difference. It's sort of the difference between making a living and making a difference. Two different things. And hopefully you are making some difference with your life, because that's what God calls you to do. And when you realize what that difference is, it's transformative for you, because you've discovered what God put you on this green earth to do. I gave this book to a good friend of mine who, a few months before he would die, and he read the book, and we had worked on a project together that just totally animated him, and he had built clean buildings around the world. So he was a very accomplished builder, had buildings to look at. That's my resume. I did that building on 31st Street and that building. But what he was doing was creating a scholarship to support poor kids who had nothing, but who should be in college. And so he had done that, and we had done it together, and he got to know the kids, and he realized, he could see how it was changing their lives. So when he read the book, he came back to me and almost with tears said, "That's me. I'm there. This is the most important thing I'm doing that I'll ever do. I built buildings, I had a family, but this is the most important thing." So, you know, look for your vocation if you have not yet found it. But anyway, in my case, I've found my vocation as a Benedictine and as a priest, and that animates me today. Along with all that, my life is rooted in the Catholic Church, and that shapes my outlook on life and determines my actions. In any case, I am very conscious on a daily basis that I come from the Christian tradition, and I'm also keenly aware of the fact that sometimes part of that Christian tradition can be countercultural, meaning that we kind of butt heads with some of the prevailing notions in society. And I'm not criticizing just our own time. Every century the church has faced this. And even sometimes the church has faced it within itself. It's why we have periodically had reform movements in the church. It's not because somebody wanted to just kind of rile everybody up and change everything, but rather it's because the church needed reform. And you can draw up your own list from your memory of recent times where we needed reform. But in any case, there are things about being Catholic that put us at odds sometimes with cultural trends. So what makes the Christian world countercultural? Well, to start with, I would say it's our biblical worldview. We come out of the Bible. Our Christian faith is rooted in the Bible. And it's why, and this is a plug for reading the Bible, it's why you should read the Bible. You already do, whether you realize it or not. You've been exposed to huge amount of the Bible just by going to Mass. But if you do spiritual reading and Lectio Divina, these are important ways to hear what God is saying to you personally. So, not surprisingly, Pope Benedict in particular pushed Lectio Divina, which goes back to the earliest times in the Church. And more recently, within the last week, Pope Leo has urged Catholics to read the Bible. Many do, you do, but a lot of Catholics don't, and Catholics in general are remiss compared to their evangelical neighbors who know the Bible inside and out. In the Bible, we encounter the worldview that shapes us as Catholics. And in particular, for me, I think tastes change over the lifetime of a reader of the Bible. And in more recent years, I've become much more aware of the significance of the book of Genesis in my own life, but in the life of my worldview as a Catholic. In Genesis, we read that God created the heavens and the earth. Metaphorically, he did 6 days to do it, but that's secondary to the real point, which is God made this world. It did not self-originate. I always thought that if it did, who was there to push the button? In any case, the Genesis has shaped me and the New Testament. And then we go from there to theological statements that sum up and define our faith going forward, like the Nicene Creed, which we say every Sunday. You may or may not be aware that this is the Nicene Creed was written in 325, so this is the anniversary, the 1700th anniversary of the Nicene Creed this year. It's hard to beat 1700 years of saying the same prayer. So anyway, realize that that's part of the Catholic tradition and the Orthodox tradition and Lutheran and Episcopalian. We all say those most Sundays. But it shapes our worldview because we believe that God created us and God created us and our neighbor in God's image. We also believe from the Nicene Creed and from the New Testament that God sent his son Jesus to us into the world for our salvation. And by the mystery of the Incarnation, God has intervened in human history to do all this. Now, those can sound like dry, abstract creedal statements until you realize that this guides us on a day-by-day basis. If you do not believe that God created our neighbors in the image of God, then we can treat them any way we want. We can enslave them, we can abuse them, we can take advantage of them. But if we believe as Christians that God has created all people in his image, we have to respect them as sacred characters. They're images of the sacred. So the takeaway for all of us is that we live by our Christian worldview. And that includes seeing the face of Christ in other people, because we have Jesus' words attesting to that, and we've seen other Christians be Christ to us. One of the things that I also find interesting about the church is that internally the church is kind of a parallel universe. I became very much aware of this earlier this week when we had a conference with the Bishop of St. Cloud and his staff, and he meets 3 times a year with the sisters with the priors from the Franciscan sisters in Little Falls, the prioress of St. Benedict's Monastery in St. Joseph, and then with the abbot. This time they brought all their staff. So it was like, what are we going to do? We're going to waste 2.5 hours. What a shame. But in the process of talking about what we were doing, what were the things we were challenged to do, it occurred to me in a way it had never done before, and that was the parallel character of the church. Because what's interesting is the bishop is sitting here, and there's not a single diocesan priest in the room, and yet all of our monasteries are situated within the diocesan structure of the diocese. So that you take a grid and put down a map of the diocese and the territorial parishes, but we're a parallel universe. because like at St. John's, technically we're not subject to the bishop because we're an independent community. In any case, then you multiply it by all the other organizations in the church that kind of have their own path, their own existence. There's the Order of Malta, Order of the Holy Sepulchre, the Serra Club. I mean, you don't find your home in a parish. It's in the diocese, but you kind of are self-motivated to take on this special ministry in the church. And so you think, compare that to, say, the First Baptist Church of Buffalo, Minnesota. What else do they belong to? Maybe they belong to the Southern Baptist Convention, thank you. But otherwise, there's no larger structure. But we're like the steel structure that builds a skyscraper with all these levels of activity. And in one sense, they're all independent of each other, but in another sense, we're all driven by the same creed and commitment of faith. And the church has managed to survive through all these centuries because of all these levels of interest and involvement that are parallel to each other. And the other thing is that they're not all created to do the same thing. The Serra Club was not created to run hospitals or run orphanages. You started to encourage vocations to the priesthood and other forms of ministry in the church. Benedictines were formed to live in community and pray together and work. The Jesuits were formed for missionary work and teaching, and so on. And my point being that everyone does something that's very particular to them. Think of it as like the big ornithological chart for birds. You know, robins eat worms, other birds eat corn, and so on. Everyone does something slightly different, but together we make for this powerful entity called the church. And if somebody doesn't do their work, the whole is diminished. And so that's why the work of Serra is so important. You can't say, well, you know, compared to what they do in this other group, we're nothing, so let's just fold up. No, you have to do your work, you've dedicated yourselves to it, and the vitality of the church depends on you doing what you have chosen and set out to do. So I see that as really important. And along with that is we march together as church. We are the people of God. And in that context, coming out of a common creed and a biblical worldview, we do find ourselves as a church running to a different drummer occasionally when compared to the world. And I don't mean that as like necessarily, well, there's a political universe which we can choose to participate in or just throw ourselves in and become political animals, which some people do. There's the economic order, and as Christians we participate in those and we bring our values and principles with us as we participate in these. But we don't say, well, remember the old saw, which no longer holds, that the Episcopal Church is the Republican Party at prayer. That hasn't happened since World War II. But you get the point. And you can say now almost evangelicals are a particular party. Anyway, we find ourselves participating in a much larger world and a pluralistic society, but we bring a particular point of view as Catholic Christians to the world in which we live. And part of that is that even when we encounter or work alongside people who are not Catholic, we still have the mandate to be the face of Christ to those people and to look for the presence of God in those people because they are created in the image of God. By the mystery of our incarnation, we are in the 21st century, whether we like it or not. That's because our parents chose to give us birth when they did. And that means that we can look back with nostalgia on previous centuries of the church, but it's pointless to wish things were like they were in the 12th century. For one thing, if we wish we were living in a world like the 12th century, we'd all be dead already. So remember that part. Turning back the clock is not really an option today, especially if we're interested in bringing other people to an encounter with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is here yesterday, today, and forever. So if we only limit him to the past, it's kind of pointless. We're not doing our job. So in terms of the work of Serra, this means that you have to encounter people. You don't go looking for people who would love to live in the 8th century to be your ministers. For one, they wouldn't know any English. But then secondly, you want people who can deal with the current world rather than hide our light under a bushel. So Scripture can give us lots of points for meditation on what we need to do in the here and now. And by our incarnation, we have placed in the here and now. So if you want to encourage vocations to ministry in the Catholic Church, you've got to be attentive to the things that drive potential candidates and be able to speak with them and find a common language that inspires them to want to participate in the life of the church rather than push them and force them to be part of this time. So we have to be aware of the vocational situation of people coming to religious life or seminaries today. And I gather that was part of the subject of yesterday's talk by an individual from St. Paul's Seminary who thinks of the candidate from 1948 would have been typical of the candidates from 1948, but they're the lone wolf in 2026 because everybody comes from a world that is very different today, and we've got to be aware of that. Realize that life may be easy for you as a Catholic, but not for these people necessarily. And so you've got to be able to meet them halfway and walk with them to this vocational decision. Tradition shapes us, and the church has a lot of tradition. Some of it we call normative, and some of it is not normative. And by that I mean some parts of our tradition are at the core of who we are as church and as believers and the creed, and some of what we do can be changed. For example, non-normative. We can say Mass in Slovakian if we want. So language is secondary, and in fact in the first centuries of the church, Greek was the liturgical language. There wasn't a non-Greek or a non-Syrian bishop of Rome for the first 500 years of the church, lest we forget. They were not Latin speakers because the Christian community in Rome in those first centuries were largely Greek and Syrian immigrants. So popes naturally were Greek or Syrian. But in any case, I'm just making the point, illustrating the point that some things change from century to century, but other things cannot. So some are normative, some are not. Serra is at the heart of something that is normative and cannot change. You are at in Jesus' preaching, the sacraments became normative for our life as Catholic Christians and for Orthodox Christians and Lutherans and Episcopalians. So we can't say as members of Serra that, the sacraments, they just don't sell the way they used to, so we're gonna focus on something else. Well, that's nice, but the church needs somebody to focus on the sacramental life and make sure that we have people who are called vocationally to provide this, I hate to use the word service, but that's what it is. It's a service to others, a sacrifice for some. But in effect, the work of Serra is at the core of the church. The very being of the church benefits from your efforts. And you can promote other kinds of things too, like, I don't know, I have none to suggest at the moment, but there's lots of things that are wonderful traditions in the life of the church, but they are not at the core of what the church is. So I had a wonderful teacher who was my dissertation director, a guy named Yaroslav Pelikan, a tremendous theologian who grew up in Missouri Synod, but eventually became Orthodox. But he once made a comment that tradition is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism is the dead faith of the living, if you get the point. Tradition is the living faith of the dead, meaning what we've inherited from past generations of Christians who have passed it on one generation. In fact, that's the meaning of the word traditio in Latin, is to pass on. So tradition is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. So we can pretend like we live in the 5th century and recreate everything, but generally we're kind of selective when we choose to do that. We usually include indoor plumbing. Anyway, so, but I think that's very important, that we don't freeze ourselves in the past, but take from the past what is life-giving. So anyway, for me, on a personal level, in business, you can appreciate this in particular. The worst phrase in business, the most costly phrase in business is, "We've always done it that way." And you've all encountered that. And it's a good way to go out of business as a business. So if it's true in business, it's also true in the church. There are things we've done. Actually, there's, aside from like the sacraments and the Bible itself, there's very few things that we've done all the way through 1900 years of experience. But those core principles we hold on to for dear life because they are the part of our life. So in any case, if we hold on to tradition as a great gift from our ancestors who produced the tradition out of their commitment to live the Gospels day by day and year by year and century by century, that is life-giving. If we do it out of a sense of traditionalism, we become living fossils. And the best example I can think of is Amish, who have hooks and eyes because they did not have buttons in the 17th century. And so that's when they were, 16th and 17th century, and that's when they were formed. So they could not change. And they thought of anything that wasn't in the Bible, therefore was forbidden. Same with early Calvinists who got rid of church organs because it wasn't in the Bible. But there are things we can adapt and change, and it's important to be aware of anything that can give us life as Catholic Christians, we should do. Anything that takes away from the vitality of the church, we should be suspicious about and evaluate. And I won't go any further with that, except to say that the value of tradition is it helps to remind us of what our commitments are as Christians, as Catholic Christians. So what are the takeaways that I would leave you with today? Well, first of all, the tradition that we espouse and commit ourselves to in the Serra Club is a commitment to the sacramental life of the church. That is the core of what the church is about. And it's not like kabuki, where you do a ritual and it's very ritualized and almost soulless. Our Eucharistic celebration is ritual, but it is life-giving, and it creates the church as community. A baptism receives somebody into the church. It's not a soulless kind of performance. So you have chosen to support something that is at the core of the church. At the same time, some of the things that we do as Catholics can seem countercultural to our neighbors who may be atheist or Buddhist or Muslim or whatever. The important thing is that we don't go out on jihad and fight those people, but we rather join them in conversation and realize that the grace of God flows through our mouth, but seldom through a sword. And in that respect, we have to kind of pay attention to the times and realize what is the best strategy to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And so I use an example that perhaps has touched your lives, but it's something it's a conversation I've had with just a ton of people over the years. And that is the keen disappointment they feel when their grandchildren don't seem to go to church. And what should they do about it? You know, some will report on taking drastic action. You know, as long as they're in my house, they're going to church, and so on down the line. And I always remind them of one thing first, and that is their pilgrimage in life is not done yet. They have St. Augustine took years to come to the realization that he could and would become Catholic. But even when he was close to becoming Catholic, his line was, Lord, save me, but not just yet. Because the sacrifice would be too great. Constantine became Catholic, but he wasn't baptized until on his deathbed, for example. So, but the other part of that is the best way to convince your grandchildren that faith is valuable is to show it in your own life. If you went to church out of a sense of, you know, I have to do this. If I don't, I'm going to hell, and your grandchildren think you're just a curmudgeon, that's not life-giving. They want to see what it has. If faith has meant something to you and transformed your life, eventually they're going to want to know about it. And if it meant so much to you and transformed your life, could it transform their lives as well? So give them time. Sometimes it takes 20, 30, 40 years. But you certainly can't force them. Force is not a strategy that works, but kindness and love can work because you're showing the face of Christ to them. So showing them that Jesus Christ has changed your life and can change theirs is the best way to evangelize anybody. And I promised I'd come back to the Schotten with one last comment, and that's what I'll end with. But it shows you just what can happen if you unintentionally are nice. This last summer we had, every summer we have a program that is funded by the NEH and Dumbarton Oaks, which is Harvard's Byzantine Studies program in Washington. And we do, at the library, because they do Eastern languages, they teach courses in Armenian and Syriac and Aramaic. And so one of the guys who was teaching this summer taught Armenian. And I got to know him, and we got together several times over the summer. And he taught at Sun and Somo, the Benedictine College in Rome, so he knew Benedictines. And he was young. Anyway, he was intending to apply to the novitiate at the Schottenstift in Vienna. And he had spent time there. He liked the community. He was American, but he had dual German citizenship. But there was something that gave him pause, and he didn't quite know what it was. But anyway, I encouraged him and said, you know, the Schotten's a wonderful community, and you really should give them the full opportunity. So he went back and did. And so he came back for a visit to St. John's 2 months ago to begin the process of applying for postulancy at St. John's. So I thought I was going to have two guys go to the Schotten because of me, and God surprised me by saying the second one's not meant for the Schotten, he's meant for St. John's. Well, it just shows you sometimes the goodness you show to other people can surprise you in ways that you did not expect. And the important thing is it's the same thing about prayer. We pray for things, and when we pray for things, for specific outcomes, and sometimes you don't get what you pray for. Instead, God gives you what you need. And so your unintended kindness to people whom you don't even know matters a great deal. And you are ambassadors for Jesus Christ in places where priests cannot go. And you have to remind them that and not be pushy about it or overly energetic, but to remind them that we are all created in the image of God. And I'm showing you a bit of God working in my own life. So that's the takeaway for today, for this morning anyway, to remember that as members of Serra, your goal is not to go out and herd people into seminaries, but rather to help them discover why they should be in a seminary.